Get ready for a wild week in financial markets as global equities tumble and the Aussie dollar sinks. China holds out an olive branch to Canberra, and the AFL Grand Final ratings are about as good as the Sydney Swans. It's Monday, the 26th of September, 2022. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael. What a weekend of sport, especially if you're a supporter of the Swans, the Wallabies and South Sydney.
You sound a little bit down this morning, Sean.
Ouch. At least South were sort of in it at half time. Swans weren't in it after 10 minutes. The Wallabies weren't in it after about 3 minutes. Disappointing. Got some good news?
Can I share something that will help lift your spirits?
Please.
A little. It is. You know what? Monday's actually at risk of becoming Review Monday, where I share a really good review with you.
Nothing wrong with that.
There is not, especially when it's a nice one. Remember last week we had a review from a lovely listener who said that our voices were very soothing and calming.
Yes, we liked her.
How about this one from Kate? Says, this is on Apple Podcasts, I agree that Sean's voice is very calming. With all the fear that mainstream media create, this is a great alternative with actual facts. Look, Kate says a lot of other things, but I just need to come back to the fact that Sean's voice is very calming.
It seems to be an absence of anything about your voice whatsoever.
Yes. And she goes on to say that she's been listening since the beginning, have recommended to so many people. I work in lending and your independent perspective has really helped me through the last few years. I'm kind of getting the feeling that she's talking directly to you now and not to me. But anyway.
No, it's to both of us. What a great compliment, Kate. Thank you very much.
She finished by saying, I recently got my tradie boyfriend on board. After his first listen, he said, geez, these fellas are smart, hey? Oh.
So that's great. That is fantastic. It's kind of funny when we do this podcast, how do you pitch a podcast on business? And I must say, we try really hard to explain things in English. That's kind of the bottom line to this.
Yeah.
And so we would like to appeal to all sorts of people. So, Kate, that's about as good a review as we've ever had, Michael.
Oh, it could be just a little bit better if she mentioned me by name in there as well. But look, if you'd like to share a review with us, we would love to receive it. Apple Podcasts is the place to do that. And if you want yours to be read out as part of Review Monday, just mention me by name. And I can pretty much guarantee it. Now, immediately after the show, Sean, you've got a chat coming up with Donahue D'Souza, who is the head of investments at HSBC.
Yes, that's right. Don is a kind of semi-regular here. They've done some work about what investors are doing. And despite all the volatility, people are still ploughing into equities. We talk about that and also, a few tips about what you should do if you do want to buy equities.
Yeah, and actually that's a perfect segue into our lead story today, Sean, talking about volatility, because we can get ready for a pretty wild week in financial markets. The ASX set to tumble today, bonds being sold off heavily, and the Aussie dollar struggling to stay above 65 US cents.
Yeah, sentiment is overwhelmingly negative and regulators don't seem to be able to do much about it. With global interest rates set to keep rising, investors are worried about recessions in the United States, in Europe, in the United Kingdom, and possibly in Australia. Let's first look at global markets, Michael. Wall Street fell again over the weekend with the Dow Jones Industrial Average, which measures the big 30 stocks on Wall Street, closing at its lowest level since 2020. The broad-based S&P 500 fell 1.7%. The tech-heavy Nasdaq fell 1.8%. In Europe, the FTSE 100 shed 2%, as the UK government released a mini-budget with generous tax cuts designed to boost consumption and growth. You'd think that'd be good, but markets fear it'll just trigger more inflation. Therefore, they sold the market off. No matter what the government or regulators are doing at the moment, and all the regulators are out there hiking interest rates, doesn't seem to be calming markets.
And the thing is, Sean, it's not just equities, is it?
That's right. Bonds are being sold off big time. On Friday night, UK 5-year bonds were sold off the most in at least 30 years. US bonds are in the middle of the longest losing streak since at least 1976. The reason for all this is investors don't want fixed rate bonds when interest rates are rising, because they think next month or the month after, they'll be able to buy those fixed rate bonds at a higher interest rate than what they're getting now. Therefore, they're selling them. The prices are falling. The Aussie dollar is going okay against most currencies, but not the US dollar. It's down at 65.1 US cents. That's back to the level of about May 2020, when the world was in the grip of the COVID crisis. Oil prices continue to slide last week, with Brent crude below $87 a barrel. Now, crude remains on track for its first quarterly decline in 2 years. We should be happy about that because we should start seeing that at the petrol bowser. Only problem, with a weak Aussie dollar, oil becomes more expensive, so we don't get the benefits. Gold's reputation as a store of value is getting a hammering as it slides. An ounce of it is currently worth $1,643. Now remember, this is the thing that you're supposed to put your money into in rough times. It just ain't working that way.
Okay, so big question. What's going to happen today on the local market?
Well, futures trading suggests the market will fall by at least 1% today. Now, about $43 billion was wiped off the market on Friday. The S&P ASX 200 closed down nearly 2% to 6,575 points. The bourse is now back to its level of early July and not far off 10% below where it was a month ago. On Friday, of the top 40 stocks, only the miners, BHP, Rio Tinto and Fortescue Metal gained. The rest all slid back. The banks fell, so too the retailers, the tech stocks, the telcos, pretty much everyone. About 90% of stocks went backwards on Friday. Worst was Block down more than 8%, while Xero lost 7.8%. The concern is it's going to happen again today.
All right, we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, this could be a bit of good news. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi says Beijing is willing to work with Australia to resolve differences between the two countries.
That's right. The comments were made following a bilateral meeting between Mr. Huang and Australia's Foreign Minister Penny Wong on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly over the weekend. He also said Beijing welcomed Australia's reaffirmation of its one China policy relating to Taiwan, which of course China considers part of its territory. It's worth understanding what this one China policy means because it's really important to Beijing. It means Australia basically acknowledges Beijing's view that Taiwan is a province of China and does not recognise Taiwan as a sovereign nation. Australia doesn't necessarily support that claim and has unofficial contact with Taiwan, but it doesn't see it as an independent nation. Mr. Huang said that the relationship between the two countries should become more mature and stable, resilient, and without surprises. These are all baby steps. Long, long way to go, but at least they're baby steps.
Yeah, it is progress, it sounds like. Now, Sean, the 4-day long weekend in Melbourne, the AFL Grand Final, the National Day of Mourning last Thursday, it was never going to be a great weekend for selling houses, was it?
True, especially in Victoria. Mind you, Sydney had a pretty busy weekend with more than 800 auctions scheduled. If you want to realise how poor a weekend it was in Melbourne, there were just 132 auctions scheduled. Now, that's not that unusual for Grand Final weekend. Who'd sell a house on a day like that? Brisbane actually had more auctions over the weekend than Melbourne. That very seldom happens outside Grand Final weekend. Overall, the preliminary national clearance rate was 61%, down from 62.5% last weekend, but at least it's still well above the lows of July, according to CoreLogic. Now, we have the Rugby League Grand Final next weekend. That doesn't tend to affect the Sydney market as much as the AFL Grand Final does the Melbourne market, but after that, you will really see what's happening in the property market because that is the height of spring selling season.
Now, Sean, late last week we were talking about the rain that was on its way and the towns of Warren and Wee Waa in New South Wales, the northwestern parts of the state really, are cut off by floodwaters and they're likely to remain so until at least tomorrow.
That's right. Emergency services used aircraft to deliver water, medicine, food and other supplies to the towns. The town of Gunnedah is also under threat. The Namoi River, which peaked at 8.24 metres on Saturday, is now receding, so Gunnedah doesn't look like it's going to flood. There's plenty of rain around New South Wales. Tragically, over the weekend, the body of a 5-year-old boy was found inside a submerged ute in central west New South Wales. The Bureau of Meteorology says the southern and central inland parts of the state are likely to get hit hardest in the next few days.
Sean, Cybersecurity Minister Claire O'Neill plans to reveal new reforms this week, forcing businesses to alert banks quickly about breaches of customer data to limit the likelihood of money being fraudulently taken from their accounts.
Of course, it comes after Optus experienced a huge breach last week. According to the Financial Review, Ms. O'Neill believes banks being alerted to customers' exposure to data breaches would enable them to apply greater scrutiny to activity on their accounts and could help customers dispute transactions in the event of theft. Last Friday, Optus CEO Kelly Bayer Rosmarin delivered an emotional apology following the group's data breach, which could affect nearly 10 million current and former employees. It's still not clear whether it's a criminal-based attack or whether it's a state-based attack, exactly what they're asking for. It occurred on Wednesday night, and the media is reporting that it exploited a weakness in Optus's firewall. The attack exposed passport, driver's license and phone numbers, email and home addresses, and dates of birth of 2.8 million customers. A further 7 million Optus users had their dates of birth, email addresses and phone numbers stolen. Over the weekend, an anonymous user claimed to have the data of 11.2 million people. It's hard to check the veracity of that at this stage, though.
Sean, interesting story in the Wall Street Journal with reports that the White House is in talks to expedite the delivery of Australia's new submarines to the mid-2030s as part of a bid to counter China's growing military might.
After the report, it's interesting that Defence Minister Richard Marles didn't really dispute it. He basically responded by saying it was important to get the capability as soon as possible. He added that the original timeline to receive the subs in the 2040s would have opened a military capability gap. So that does sound as if something's happening. An interim report on Australia's military capabilities and timeline for nuclear subs being prepared is expected to be received by Mr. Marles sometime in November.
Suncorp held its annual general meeting on Friday, and Chair Christine McLaughlin said an internal review has shown that selling its banking operations to ANZ or going it alone was better than merging with a regional operator.
Yeah, this has been a very contentious point for Suncorp. Banking is increasingly about scale, and that seems evident in Suncorp's decision to offload its bank to ANZ for nearly $5 billion. Apparently, regional bank Bendigo had been in touch with Suncorp about the banking business, but it just didn't get a response. Ms. McLaughlin said going with ANZ was the best option, notwithstanding some bank analysts have pondered if a bidding war for the business between ANZ and Bendigo might have been a better outcome for shareholders. Fair point.
Oz Minerals, which has been pursued by BHP, has given the green light to a $1.7 billion copper nickel mine in remote WA.
Yes, it will be interesting if the move causes any consternation in BHP's Collins Street headquarters in Melbourne. BHP bid $8.4 billion for Oz Minerals, but was rejected. There's still plenty of chat about a new bid, though. The massive capital investment in West Musgrave in Western Australia is well ahead of the original estimates of $1.1 billion. Oz Minerals is also considering selling a minority stake, but not to another miner, possibly to a car or battery manufacturer, which is an interesting concept that the miners are looking for the end users to take investments in it.
This is an interesting one, Sean. Energy Minister Chris Bowen has told a US audience that he wants to see electric vehicle manufacturing in Australia.
Mr. Bowen was at the Global Clean Energy Forum in Pittsburgh, where he said a faster take-up of EVs in Australia was needed. The forum was told that globally about half new car sales will be electric by 2030. That compares to about 2% currently in Australia. We are well behind on that aspect. Mr. Bowen said he wanted to see EV manufacturing in Australia and agreed it needs government help. He hinted at the introduction of tougher fuel emission standards. That's something many in the EV industry are calling for. Remember, the last car to be manufactured in Australia was a General Motors Holden unit, and we haven't done so since 2017.
Macquarie Group has lost its bid to buy British waste management business Suez Recycling and Recovery UK from French giant Veolia.
Yes, the deal was pretty much done last month. We said that, but a rival consortium exercised its right of first refusal. Now, the consortium are shareholders of French waste management company Suez SA, which was spun out of Veolia. They're kind of like cousins, and so they had the right of refusal, and it looks like they've knocked Macquarie out.
I like that idea of companies being cousins and consortiums being cousins. It's nice.
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
It's an observation that has absolutely no relevance to anything really, but it just makes everything seem a little bit more friendly.
That's right. Well, in this case, you see, Macquarie was the outsider coming in, whereas kind of they've kept it in the family.
Just makes it feel warm and fuzzy, doesn't it, Sean? Gaming group PointsBet, with Shaquille O'Neal as a major shareholder and promoter, has received regulatory approval to start operating in Louisiana.
It takes to 12 the number of states the ASX-listed bookmaker operates in. It's been in the US since 2019 and it's taken advantage of the opening up of the gaming market in that country state by state. But it's a fiercely competitive market, and PointsBet's share price went from $1.20 at the beginning of the pandemic, got to nearly $15 in February 2021, mid-pandemic. It's now back to around $2 a share.
And finally, Sean, we mentioned this at the top of the show. Ratings for the AFL Grand Final on Saturday were pretty disappointing for Channel 7, with 900,000 fewer viewers than a year ago.
That's right, an average of 3.06 million fans tuned in, which means it will still be one of the most viewed programs for the year. But as you said, almost 1 million fewer than last year and 750,000 fewer than 2020. It's not a great look for Seven West Media, given it and Foxtel just agreed to pay $4.5 billion to lock in the broadcasting rights of the AFL from 2025 to 2031. It's also triggered a renewed push to start the game later than the 2:30 p.m, which was kickoff time on Saturday. The National Rugby League Grand Final is in the evening, which helps attract a massive audience. Also, that number for the AFL might be hurt by the scoreline. I mean, Geelong Cats absolutely thrashed the Sydney Swans. 5.76 million people tuned in at some point during the game, but clearly millions, literally millions, didn't hang around, presumably because of how one-sided the game was.
Okay, moving on to overseas news, because I know talking about it just gets you a little bit upset. Sean, North Korea has fired a short-range ballistic missile, marking a return to provocations with US Vice President Kamala Harris due to arrive in the region, and as an American aircraft carrier group prepares for naval exercises with South Korea.
The launch yesterday was the first since the start of June. At least one short-range ballistic missile was fired from about 100 kilometres north of Pyongyang towards waters off its east coast, according to Bloomberg. The missile reached an altitude of about 60 kilometres and flew about 600 kilometres. The Japanese Defence Ministry said it splashed down outside of the country's exclusive economic zone after flying on an unusual trajectory. Concerning, though, given that the US Vice President is about to turn up in the region.
Finally, Sean, something a little bit lighter to finish on. How much for a hamburger and chips in the United States? Bloomberg has created an index to measure costs like this, and it's up 13% in the past year.
I think that you talked about Monday being Review Monday. I think we should have Crazy Index Monday as well, because this is crazy. I mean, the US is home of hamburger and chips, I suppose. It's called the American Diner Index. Who needs inflation figures when you've got the American Diner Index? It includes the cost of ingredients for a toothpicked club sandwich, as well as the accompanying potato chips, ice cream, and soft drink. Now, prices for bread and lettuce are up 33% and 20% over the past year. Turkey and ham, both part of a club sandwich, are up about 10%, all up 13% increase. There you go.
Club sandwiches are possibly the greatest invention in the history of food.
I think American club sandwiches particularly.
A club sandwich is my go-to if you room service or anything like that. You know that if you order the club sandwich, you will not go wrong.
I totally agree. It is a very room service thing.
Yes, indeed. All right. Up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview, and you are speaking with Don D'Souza from HSBC today.
Yeah, he has some great data about what investors are doing, particularly since we're seeing so much volatility in financial markets at the moment, and they still love equities. So he's got a few hints on how to invest when markets are volatile.
It's coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. And as well, don't miss Stephen Koukoulas, our resident economist, with the week ahead.
Exactly. Stephen, it's his last week. He's about to go to Greece for a month or so. So it's his last week with us. We've got a great replacement from next week. It's not a huge week for the economy, but what I thought was really good in our chat was that sort of Stephen wraps up where he thinks the economy is right now. So well worth a listen.
Yeah, it sure is. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Monday, the 26th of September, 2022. Make sure you're following the podcast and join us online on LinkedIn, Twitter and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.